Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all there online. So, welcome to this special program of KFA College. The topic today given to me is economics and banking. I presume you all being students of management and business administration are aware about what is economics, what is banking, or at least you may have heard about both these topics. Anyway, I hope all you guys are staying safe at home during this pandemic stage of COVID-19, which has taken the world by storm and called the biggest catastrophic thing to happen in this world after the Second World War. And the difference here is that in the Second World War, or at least in wars and battles, you know whom you're fighting. But this is a situation where you really don't know where your enemies are and whom you are fighting and how you're fighting. Anyway, the human race, humanity has come out of, I think, many tough situations in life, and this coronavirus, COVID-19, I think will be tackled by the human race. It might take a little bit longer than expected. It could take another 1 month. It might take 2 months or even 3 months, but definitely we'll beat it, and then we will have to again carry on with our a regular lifestyle. Now, as of now, all our entire lifestyle is disturbed because of coronavirus. And since I'm also chairman of a hospital, Star Hospital, so let me tell you, coronavirus is actually a non-living organism. Is actually a molecule, protein molecule, which is enclosed in fat. So it's shrouded in fat, and then the molecule on its own can't survive. It needs the fat to continue living, and it needs human body to be attached to a human body to survive for a longer period of time. Without human body attachment, the fat disintegrates, and then the molecule will disintegrate on its own and gets destroyed. So this normally happens when the molecule is outside human body and is latched onto fabric or metal or steel or plastic, right? Because it's assumed that they have the longest life attaching to plastic bodies. They can live up to 72 hours, but they die in shorter durations when they're attached to fabric, or even steel. They are like survive for 16 to 18 hours. But it's not the whole idea behind fighting this coronavirus is, of course, social distancing and trying to break the chain. And by doing that, you try to, you also adopt processes whereby you melt the fat melts away, and the protein molecule gets exposed, and then it disintegrates. So that's the whole thing behind coronavirus or COVID-19. Okay, so coming back to our topic, economics and banking. This is actually may not be that appropriate time, or this may be probably the best time to talk about economics and banking again. All right, because what we are experiencing right now is going to affect in the way we live, in the way we breathe, in the way we will have to design our future, in the way we'll have to make our plans, and the way we're going to survive. So as of today, survival is probably the key thing. And then once we have survived, then the life must go on. So for that, definitely, then we need to plan how we should carry on with our life. And now to carry on, you all of you being management students and business administration students, let me try to get something into your now. Let's say your brain, your mind, to start, thinking how we must plan our ways ahead, uh, to survive economically, and also know a lot about you know banking, the system which makes the economy run or function properly. Uh, okay, let me come back to first economics, right? Uh, what is economics? Well, economics is a science that deals with production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. I hope you guys can see my slide. This is a slide. These are the slides which I prepared last night and this morning again. And so since I have just 1 hour session, so I need to really rush through because I have about 23 slides in total, I think. So economics is a science that deals with production and distribution and consumption of goods and services, right? So it focuses on the behavior and interaction of economic agents and how economies work. So economic agents, who are economic agents? We are the economic agents. We as the consumers, we as the producers, we as the regulators who make policies, right? We are the economic agents. And then the way we produce our goods, the way we store our goods, the way we sell or market our goods, the way the goods are sent to the market, the way we do our accounting, the way we build up uh, debits and credits entries in our books, the way we do economics, the way we do financing, the way we do the sourcing of financing from banks, from financial institutions, from other individuals, or whatever. So all these are economic agents, and all these put together, they form a larger part of economy. And a daily life of an individual is influenced by the economics of his country, his community, and even his own house. So the way we live as individual, right, is influenced by how our domestic position is, right? How much like affluent we are, or how much poor we have, or what's the stage of our financial strength, and then our surroundings, our community. What kind of community do we have? Do we have a poor community? Do we have a rich community? Right? So all these things, they dictate the way we live our daily life. So economics is a very, very important aspect of the way of living, the way of surviving. And economics of any country is influenced by economics of the world itself and the resources of his or her country, the kind of resources we have in our country. It can determine the economics of our country. And if the economics of the world, of nearby countries, of neighbor countries is good, is very good, then naturally the economy of our country will also try to go along accordingly. As of today, today's world, we have two of the fastest growing economies in the world, India on the south and China on the north. And both these economies, they came to this very affluent stage over last 25, 30 years only. So which means that now it will require some time for Nepal to learn from these two economies, these massive economies, and then take our country towards prosperity. Uh, So economics is broadly segregated into micro and macroeconomics. So at micro level, you get into small details, right? So we go into individual agents, individual people, individual households, firms, individual buyers and sellers, and then building up their transaction process. How do I produce? How do I sell? How do I do my transaction? How does a buyer buy? How does he do his books of accounts? How does he sell to again further buyers? So how is wholesaling done, retailing done? So all these small sequences, events are what you call microeconomics. Then we have macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is a larger, scale. There you're watching from the top on the overall economy of the uh, country, overall economic of the community, overall economy of the world as a whole, right? So it analyzes the entire economy of the world. So it means aggregated production, consumption, savings, and investments, and also entire issues which affect this part of economy, like including unemployment of resources. We have resources, and if they are not employed, whether they're employed or not, like labor, like the capital, the land, okay, and then other issues like inflation, right? Macroeconomics also studies inflation, the economic growth, the public policies addressing these issues, like the monetary policy, fiscal policies that every country uh, bring these policies out at least once a year uh, to plan how the country should move ahead in that particular fiscal year, and then they go for midterm reviews, they go for quarterly reviews. So these are what we call monetary and fiscal policies which drive the economy of any country. So in short, demand and supply status of any industry, okay, so this is part of the macroeconomics. So demand supply status of any industry will determine the need of any industry and the scale of operations required, the viability of such industry, the benefits such industry can give to the stakeholders. And the stakeholders could be not only the individuals, but it could be the society as a whole, and the nation again ultimately should be also will be one of the important stakeholders, because a nation will benefit through enrichment of its people, number one, and then also through mobilization of revenues required for other development activities, other social activities in the country. So that's how government will benefit from these kind of industries. I hope I'm being clear to all of you guys. I think I should minimize my screen and see if I have any messages coming from any of you guys. I can see that there aren't any coming. Now, let me go to, okay, now besides the microeconomics and macroeconomics, now, in order to address more of commercial activities in the widening world, so we have now other branches of economics that have been established so that it can support the micro and macroeconomics in whole, right? So we have what you call international economics. So this is the process of doing business at international level and the justification. So that's what international economics addresses. We have then development economics, is the processes that will help in boosting the economic standards of the country, right? So that's development economics. So to take your company from this level to that level to that level, okay? So that is what you call development economics. So this, of course, if I explain this is going to take several hours. So this is just a let's say brief introduction to you guys about what these economics parameters are. Then we have what you call labor economics. So it's a process of engaging people of the country, which is one of the most important inputs, right, in any economy. The people. Uh, so it's a process of engaging this input is development of the people, upscaling their, you know, capability, their skills, their knowledge, and then ultimate goal of the upliftment of all classes of population. So that's the ultimate goal of having this labor economics, right? And then we have the welfare economics, right? So it's the economy, it's the process of enriching the population through appropriate economic activities. So by conducting various economic activities, you are going to enrich or increase the living standard of the general population. Next, we see now in economy what are the minute components, but important components. Okay, so normally when you talk about economy, about country's economic standing or where country lies, we measure that by using such parameters like gross domestic product. I presume you know what is gross domestic product, GDP. Then we have what you call balance of payment, what is called GOP. We have trade surplus or deficit. Then we calculate different kind of trade indicators. We calculate the unemployment rates, the inflation rates, the foreign currency position of the country. So these parameters, they show the economic strength of any company, and that will give us idea where a country lies in. When you talk about almost like 200 countries of this world, 190 plus, I think, we'll know which country lies where, right? And that most important parameter to judge where, in which position country lies, how strong a country is measured by GDP, gross domestic product. What is GDP? So GDP is the market value of all final goods and services from a nation in a given year. So in a year, the value of all goods and services, you know, produced in a country is market value. They add up to form a gross domestic product. So it as the value of all the industrial goods, all the trading goods, all the trading materials, and then all the services you provide, the value that comes out of the revenue, the total revenue that's generated from services like could be transportation sector, airline sector, hospital sector, the education sector. So these are all service sectors. So the market value all adds up, and then that gives the GDP of a country. So here after, guys, I'm going to show you a chart that exhibits the GDP of the top GDP nations, and also just to have a rough idea of where Nepal lies in the South Asian region, SAARC countries. That also I'm going to show to you in the following slides. Okay, here we go. So on the left side of your screen, you'll see that I've shown countries. Okay, in terms of GDP, America, you guessed it right. America is the largest country. It's an economic powerhouse, although right now it is intimidated by coronavirus and is kind of like the hub of coronavirus infected country in the world right now. So what you call an epicenter. We started from Hunan in Hubei province of China, has now slowly moved from Hunan. It moved on to Italy, then move on to Spain, then the entire Europe, including United Kingdom, and now the epicenter has moved from Europe to USA, and USA, New York, the East Coast, is the again the epicenter of the epicenter, right? So now is intimidated by the unseen enemy, known as COVID-19. And nevertheless, as of now, USA is the strongest country in terms of economy in the world. Last year, 2019, the United States of America had a GDP of $21,400 billion, or $21.4 trillion, making it number one country in the world. Number two, rising up, is China with $14,100 million, or $14.1 trillion. So $14,100 billion. And third is Japan, $5,200 billion, or $5.2 trillion. So you can see that USA alone is China, and is bigger than China and Japan added together. But nevertheless, it's nice to see that at least two of the Asian countries are in the top three. And following close on the heels of Japan is Germany at number 4 with $3,900 billion of GDP. And in fifth position is India with $2.9 trillion. Okay, of course, they are far below USA and China, but still India has quite good potential of rising up and probably trying to rub shoulders with a country like Germany. And knowing India is a massive population, the increasing industrialization of India and growing commercial activities, I think India will definitely do a lot better in a few years' time. And then following closely on India's heels is UK. Of course, UK are part of our Great Britain or England all put together. They ruled the world one time, and they even ruled India, right? And today, India has a bigger GDP than UK. UK stands in sixth position, and I think France too has almost equivalent GDP and stands in the seventh position. And then again, South Korea is there with $1.6 trillion of GDP, standing in the 12th position. If you talk about South Asian countries, SAARC region countries, India, of course, is at number one in the world ranking, number 5 with $2.9 trillion of GDP. Bangladesh follows in the world ranking is 39 with $317 billion GDP. Pakistan is third, Sri Lanka is fourth, and Nepal is fifth in terms of GDP. Okay, standing at 101 position in the world with $29.8 billion, and then followed by Maldives, a distant fifth, and sixth and seventh. Maldives and Bhutan. Bhutan had the smallest GDP of $2.8 billion only, and of course, it's a very small country, so we can't say much about it. And then, so yeah. Now in Nepal, okay, look at the trend. The GDP has moved over last few years. I've taken a slide with GDP moving since 2017 to 2018, 19, 20, 21. The estimate 2020 is also estimate because 2020 we just stepped into it and now hit by coronavirus. So we really don't know how the GDP is going to behave this year. Because in 2017 we started with a GDP of $25.18 billion, which went on to 29.04. 2018 and 2019, see, there was not much of a growth, just 29.82, so very small, minimal growth. And then this year, there was a target of taking the GDP up to 33.92 and 2021 to $37.26 billion. Now, if we talk about the annual growth rate, it was in 2017, it was 8.2% over 2016 figure. And in 2018, it was 6.7%. And 2019, full actual calculation has not yet been done, but it's estimated at around 7.1%. But I think is below 7.1%. So far as I understand, it's around 6.5% only. And then in 2020, the estimate was for 6.3%, because the base figure is increasing, so the percentage has will not go up accordingly. So it was a 6.3%. And for next year, 2021, it was estimated at 5.8%. Now, this 6.3% GDP for 2020, now this is going to be extremely difficult to achieve in the face of what's happening here due to coronavirus. So already, I think World Bank has an IMF. They have already said that the growth will probably go down by 2.5 to 3%. So if that really happens, then our GDP growth will be around 3 to 3.5% only for 2020. And we don't know whether this will carry on in the same manner till 2021. It all depends on how fast the world can recover from the coronavirus onslaught that's going on now, right? And then in terms of GDP, per capita, how much did we Nepalese have a share in GDP? So in 2017, it was $911 per capita. In 2018, it rose up to $1,034, $1,048 in 2019, and this year in 2020, it was expected to go up to 1,177, and then next year to 1,276. Now, I think a break has been applied because of coronavirus, and we are wondering whether now our per capita GDP will go to this level. It may even go below 2019 level. And this calculation, mind you, is done by taking into consideration what you call PPP index. That's power, purchasing power, of people, the index, which takes into account the living standard of Nepal, because living standard of US, living standard of Europe and Japan and Nepal is entirely different. So that's why taking all these considerations, different variables, so calculations is done. Okay, how much does it cost for normal living to happen in Nepal, right? So with that, what you call a purchasing power parity is done, and then GDP is calculated accordingly. If you go by the same standard that's followed for Europe and US, probably our GDP per capita would be only half of what the figures you see out here. So it can't be more than $500 or $600. Right. Another thing, important variable is the government's gross debt as a percentage of GDP. So this is the debt which the government has, the loan, the borrowing the government has taken from international community, from international banks like World Bank or IMF or ADB, or even from domestic borrowing. It also borrows from domestic banks, domestic commercial banks, especially. Uh, so all these add up to, like, in 2017 it was 26.1% of that year's GDP, and then it rose up to 30.2, 32.6 last year, and this year government was projecting, as per the budget, 34.9% as percent of GDP. Now this figure could change, uh, and in negative manner, because the government's gross debt could rise. They may be, or they will borrow to come out of this coronavirus situation. They will borrow from international community, and they could borrow from the local banks as well, right? Whereas the GDP could go down, right? Could go below what we have out here. 33.92 billion is the expectation estimate. And what if it goes down to 2019 level or even below? And as the debt goes up and GDP goes down, so I wouldn't be surprised if this figure of 34.9 would go way above, could be even 45, or even much more higher. So I think that's a big figure, big jump. All right. Okay. Talk about inflation rate. Okay. The way our prices have shot up, the way our commodities, the food items, and cost of services, everything's gone up. They all account to the inflation, right? So as inflation grows, people's what do you call the purchasing capacity will be hit. So you may probably have heard about countries in South America, uh, and yeah, basically South America, where the inflation rate is so high that things become expensive so fast that let's say a kilo of tomatoes may cost, let's say today, uh, 50 rupees per kilo. But as you go to the market tomorrow, the same tomatoes may cost you 60 rupees, right? Or could be 70 rupees. And the after tomorrow, it could be 80 rupees. A, a pair of shoes today could cost you, let's say, 1,000 rupees. You go to the market tomorrow, the same pair of shoes, probably by tomorrow, the price will have jumped to 1,100 rupees or 1,200 rupees. So in South American economy, many of the countries for many years suffered massive inflation running at the rate of 50%, 60%, even 100%. So where, as such, there was lots of devaluation of the money, and then it was said that to go to buy a pair of shoes or a shirt or some basket, let's say a kilo of tomatoes, you had to carry like a bag full of money to buy those items. So that's the impact of inflation. And luckily, in Nepal, inflation has been controlled to some extent. And if you go back from 2017, the inflation rate was 4.5% in 2017, 4.2% in 18, 4.5%. And this year, the inflation was expected to go up to 6.1% because the cost of food stuff in Nepal has really gone up. So because the cost of foodstuff has gone up, so that has also resulted in the overall inflation rate going up as well, 6.1%. So as the inflation rate overtakes the bank interest rate, so that means the money, the value of money you deposit in the bank in which you are earning interest, you will be getting poorer and poorer even if you have money in the bank paying you interest, because the inflation rate, if it outstrips or overtakes the interest paid by banks, then that's when the negative issues, conditions start setting in, and you start losing the value of your money. So any good economy, the inflation rate has to be low as 1%, 1.5%, 2%. In certain countries, there are countries like Japan where sometimes it's not inflation, but there's deflation, which means the cost of lots of goods and services, in fact, could come down slightly compared to the previous year. So right, that's deflation. So that's negative inflation. And this happens in extremely strong economies. Now, next important component of economics is trade deficit and balance of payment. All right. So, what is trade deficit? It means the difference between the value of goods exported and the value of goods imported. Right. So, which means when the value of goods exported is lower than import, then definitely you have deficit. So, Nepal's trade deficit has been widening every year as we are importing far more than exporting. Okay, so our imports is far more than exports because we now are importing almost everything. We talk about petroleum products, we're talking about metals, industrial raw materials. We are even importing uh, food grains traditionally, which we used to export, like rice, for example, or wheat, and we are importing now almost everything. Even rice we're importing. So, which means our trade deficit has been widening as our export uh, has not grown, but the import is growing, right? The food grains, the industrial raw materials, the petroleum products, which is number one. We're importing a lot of metals, a lot of gold, right? And So all these contribute to the widening trade deficit of Nepal. And as of 2019, our trade deficit stood at 103 billion rupees. That's a lot of money, which means in our trading items, we imported 103 billion rupees worth of goods more than our export value. So by next year, 2021, we expect this trade deficit to widen to 113.337 billion. But I think this the deficit figure might grow bigger than 113 billion rupees because now, because of the coronavirus effect again, we may not have more goods to export, and we may have to rely on imports of more items, more food grains, right? So in that matter, probably I will be surprised if this trade deficit widens further than 113 billion as projected. And then we have a balance of payment as important component of economics. And the balance of payment is the accounting record of all monetary transactions between a country and rest of the world. Okay, so that is BOP. So since last year, Nepal's BOP has started becoming negative. So last fiscal year, it was 67.5 billion, okay, compared to 960 million rupees surplus the year before. So in the previous year, it was 960 million rupees surplus. So last fiscal year, it was 67.5 billion rupee deficit. So which means Nepal has been has not been able to, let's say, bring in more foreign currency into the country than what it has been sending out as payments for trade items, trade payments for service items, service payments for a lot of other things, probably even including the interest that's paid on the bank loan. So all these add up to what goes out of the country. And then what comes into the country are, of course, remittances, the aid, uh, the foreign currency we bring in through tourism sector, through export. Yeah. So all these, the difference contributes towards the balance of payment. And then so it's unfortunately stands at it stood at a negative figure of 67 billion last year, and this year, now again, because of coronavirus, our incoming foreign funds may not be again as high as expected or required to offset this negative figure of last year. So we still can't make any uh, concrete conclusion as to what figure we may be hitting. Again, foreign exchange reserve is another indicator which shows the strength of any company. And as of today, you'll be surprised that who has the largest amount of foreign currency in the world is China, with $3.107 trillion of foreign currency they have in their treasury, followed closely again by Japan, $1,359 billion, right? $1.3 trillion. Okay, so in terms of GDP, also, China and Japan were quite close. I mean, they were number two, number three. So in terms of foreign exchange reserves, they're number one and number two. And China is number one because China exports a lot, huge amount of exports they have. They produce so much that, and then most of what they produce, they export. They export to almost all the countries in the world, and the entire Europe, the United States, and of course Asian countries and Africa. So that's why, and they don't import much from these countries because they are so self-sufficient in everything. They have their own. I don't think they need to import food grains. They don't need to import textile. They have their own in-house massive raw material production base for everything. So which means they whatever they export, a lot of money. remains behind as a reserve. So then next, Japan, of course, traditionally they have always been strong exporter in the world. And then surprisingly, a small country like Switzerland, you can see they have $808 billion worth of reserve. That's quite huge amount for the size of country it is. And Switzerland is export-based economy, bringing a lot of tourists into the country. They're exporting a lot of high-tech items, equipment, especially watches. You must have heard about Swiss watches, Swiss chocolates, and that they export in billions of dollars worth of value. And then at number 7, we have India again, with foreign exchange reserve position of $475 billion. And then you'll be surprised to see that USA has only $128 billion worth of foreign exchange reserve and stands at number 22 in the world. So you can imagine the largest economy in the world. America has $120 billion and stands at number 22 in the world. And in SAARC region, in the South Asian region, which has India, which is in 7th position in the world. Next, we have Bangladesh, which is in the 51 position with a wealth foreign exchange reserve of $32 billion. Pakistan at number 74 in the world has $11 billion. Then closely, we have 75th position, Nepal in 75th position, $9.4 billion. And Sri Lanka at 84th position in the world has $7.6 billion worth of foreign exchange reserve. And then we have Bhutan, a distant 138th position with just $987 million worth of foreign exchange reserve. And then you see, Bhutan has reserve, fine. But then because they have such a small population, so they can afford to live in a very, very affluent manner. So that's Bhutan. And then following Bhutan, we have what you call Maldives, with just $722 million worth of foreign exchange reserve. And then, so much for banking. I think I have overrun my time. I segregated for banking. Now let me, for economics. Now let me go to banking. Since I'm a conventional banker, retired after 33 years of banking, and the last 10 years as a CEO of 2 banks. So of course, banking runs in my blood, and I've also been through many different banks and established 2 banks from zero. Sunrise Bank as well as Civil Bank. So 2 banks starting from zero as CEO. So probably, I mean, I have that probably record as the only CEO in the world of establishing 2 banks from zero. So what is banking? So conventionally is defined as the activity of mobilizing money from market at a certain cost and then lending that by applying certain interest rate to take care of the cost of deposit, the overhead expenses, and the whatever desired amount of profit you need to have. And as of today, Nepal Rashtra Bank has set certain regulation as to how much markup you can do in your profit. And that they have done by applying what you call an instrument called interest spread. So as for interest spread instrument, bank can charge more than 4.5% above the average cost of deposit, right? So that way it was 5%, then it's brought down to 4.9%. So ultimately they'll bring it down to 4.5%. So the interest spread will keep on decreasing, and banks will have to rely more and more on the volume to keep on maintaining the profit level each year. So it's a challenge to the banks, of course, as well. And in recent years, banking has evolved, and it's become a very complicated institution. You see, I mean, 50, 60 years back, 100 years back, when banks were first introduced and formed in the world's global economy, banks were simply involved in collecting deposits from public and then giving public some interest rate, marking up interest rate, and then lending out to business companies, business firms, or individuals doing business or whatsoever and making profit. So slowly it has changed and it became more and more complicated. Uh, 20, 25 years back, banks became involved in other development activities and international trading activities, and then started getting moving into IT, strong service sectors. Like cars and then debit cards, credit cards, and then what do you call online banking system and blah blah. So many different things. Today you can see that banking has become a very complicated, transactional kind of system, and and of course it requires a very young, fresh, and educated brain to really figure out all the products and services that the banking institution is providing to the public as of now. Okay, so recent years, banking has evolved and become a complicated institution, specializing in many services and products which have propelled the commercial activities of business firms as well. So that has, of course, helped in enriching the general population, in made it easy for general population to do the business as well. So there are various types of banks which have specialized functions. The broad category, which may differ in activities from country to country, are fundamentally guided by unified guidelines and directives that are based on Basel Accord. You know, so these directives and guidelines are based on Basel Accord. Basel is a city in Switzerland where the central bankers meet regularly, and then they decide on a lot of issues, a lot of you know, uh, some common agreed uh, pragmatic guidelines, some ratios, and the way the banking is has to be done, the risk taken care of, the various kinds of risks like the operational risk, the market risk, the credit risk. There are so many different kinds of risks. So how these risks are to be addressed, and how safety standards are to be built into the banking system, how to avoid major catastrophic you know, incidents in banking. So all these are discussed in this city called Basel in Switzerland. And initially in 1988, when they first made, they came up with this Basel Accord. And now, these guidelines and directives issued by central banks are based on the Basel Accord, and then these are also again was monitored by the World Bank, the IMF, and then of course every continent have the regional strong bank. Like in case of Asia, we have the Asian Development Bank, which also watches how the banks in Asia are performing. So that's besides the World Bank and IMF. Okay, so in Nepal, at a micro level, the banks are guided by Nepal Rashtra Bank. It's a central bank of Nepal. So it's the bank of all the banks, right? So for this, Nepal Rashtra Bank has come out with many directives based on BAFIA. So BAFIA actually stands for Banks and Financial Institutions Act. Okay, so this is called BAFIA Act. So this BAFIA, so Rashtra Bank has come out with directives based on BAFIA, which is again keeping in view the Basel Accord. Okay, that's how they have come out directives to make sure that banks in Nepal, the finance banks and financial institutions in Nepal act in a proper manner. Okay, and such acts are drafted keeping in view the provisions of Basel Accord, okay, formed by Basel Committee of on Bank Supervision in 1988. It has issued new and amended regulations over time. So they are known as Basel 1, then Basel 2, and then Basel 3. So right now, most of the banks are trying to implement the provisions of Basel 3. And of course, for banks like banks in Nepal, especially because of the nature of our economy, the size of our economy, and depth of understanding that people, business companies, and individuals and the population have about banking. So it's very difficult to implement word to word, requirements laid down in this Basel II and then Basel III. So we have what you call a slightly amended version. So to that extent, the central banks are allowed to modify, keeping in view the respective country's economy, the size of economy, the nature of economy, the nature of market. So slight revisions are made by Nepal Rashtra Bank while implementing each of these regulations, Basel 1, Basel 2, or Basel 3. I think I don't need to spend too much time here because in Nepal, banks are classified by Rashtra Bank as Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D, and Class A are all commercial banks, which have come down to 27 now from 32 about 4 years back, 5 years back, I should say. Then we have Class B banks where we have development banks of national level and then again regional level. We have three district level and then three district level banks we call Tin Jille, and then district level development banks or Ek Jille. And then we have Class C banks, which are known as finance companies, which are all of national level. And then Class D banks are microfinance companies. Now, each of these categories of banks are, uh, segregated by their paid up capital, number one, the areas of operation, number two, number three, the scope of operation they are allowed to handle. Okay, so all these issues they determine the each of these categories of banks. So Class A bank, we all know they are with 8 billion rupees capital. Class B bank has requires 2.5 billion rupees worth of capital. Class C, 80 crores, right? 800 million rupees worth of capital. And Class D is 50 crores or 500 million rupees worth of capital. And of course, these district level or district level development banks also fall under Class D banks, and they don't actually fall under, although they are known as development banks, they are classified as Class B banks. Next, besides the banks, we also have other financial institutions and financial marketplace which are not licensed by Nepal Rashtra Bank. So there we have these institutions like capital market and investment companies fall in this category. They are not licensed by Nepal Rashtra Bank, but they are also involved in mobilizing fund from various entities, from various individuals, and then they also do kind of banking activities, right? So, like we can take example of Employees Provident Fund or Karmachari Sanchay Kosh, then CIT, Citizen Investment Trust or Nagri Lagani Kosh. They are also like kind of banks. So they are investment companies as well, and they have very strong role in the capital market of country. We also have now different companies which fall in this category, like you may have heard about Nabil Investment. There's NIBL Investment. There's Lakshmi Capital Markets, and there's Civil Capital Markets. There's so almost all the banks have their own capital markets. So where the functioning is a little bit different than banking, and they have they operate in different, they function in different manner. And then we also have savings and credit cooperatives or sahakaris, as you all know, and many sahakaris now have lost faith of general public because of the bad governance in most of these savings and credit cooperatives. So this also doesn't fall under Nepal Rashtra Bank. Then we have insurance companies, like life insurance companies, non-life insurance companies. Although their business is doing insurance, but they collect so much money. They have so much fund. They have billions and billions of rupees of liquidity position. So they have become very prominent players in the financial market of the country, and they have also now started investing directly into projects. And then we have a new concept called venture capital and private equity companies, which is quite a new concept in Nepal. So if we talk about the statistics, we can see that the banking system in Nepal. So this is a consolidated figure of all the uh, Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D financial institutions, banks and financial institutions of Nepal. You can see that is growing, like uh, mid March 2019. You can see this is the upper line represents the deposit, the lower line deposit indicates the credit. This is how it has grown from mid March to mid February of 2020. See, over a period of 9-10 months, let's say almost 11 months, it has grown from 3.1 trillion rupees. The deposit has grown to 3.5 trillion rupees. That's the absolute figure. That's like 45 billion rupees growth of deposit. And in terms of credit, is grown from 2.78 trillion rupees to 3.1 trillion rupees. So that's a massive growth in credit. You can see that the growth is like almost 2.5. No, that's almost like 2.5 trillion. Sorry, 2.5 trillion rupees growth of lending, and then only 50 billion rupees worth of deposit growth. So that's you can see that the growth in lending is 5 times higher than the growth in deposits. So this is the reason why you can see there's a liquidity crunch in the market, and all the banks, they are running after depositors, trying to bring in more and more deposit into their system, because they need money to keep on lending at this rate. So we also have figures here where total deposit as a percent of GDP for each and every class institution we have shown here. And since we don't have much time, so I don't want to go into these intricacies. Let me take you out to capital adequacy ratio. I guess you guys must be aware about what is capital adequacy ratio. In case if you don't know, let me tell you. Capital adequacy ratio is the ratio of core capital or total capital to risk-weighted assets. Okay, now these are a little bit technical, and it may take me solid half an hour or maybe even more to explain to you what is risk-weighted asset. Okay, so so it's 11.79. The mandatory requirement is minimum 10, and to be able to distribute dividend, it is 11%. So here, Class A banks are marginally above the threshold where they can distribute dividend. All right, so it's 11.79. For Class B is 14.12, and Class C banks are comfortable with 18.48%, although 10% is the mandatory level. All right, so this capital adequacy actually actually is kind of a factor which determines how much lending you can do. The more you lend, the more you have risk assets in your balance sheet. So as you have more risk assets in your balance sheet, then you require more capital and reserves to offset that big portfolio in your balance sheet. So that's why capital adequacy ratio has been fixed at 10%. So if you come below 10%, then Nepal Rashtra Bank could penalize you. So you have to make sure that your capital adequacy ratio always remains above 10%. All right. Next, okay, these are the number of financial institutions we have. I don't need to bore you with these numbers because we have 27 banks, 24 development banks, 22 finance companies, and 73 we have microfinance institutions that I don't want to bore you. Now, what's the present scenario? Well, banks and financial institutions are undoubtedly the largest player in any economy. So they carry the responsibility of safekeeping the public money, providing benefit to the depositors, and facilitating the business of business firms, as well as enhancing the living standards of individuals and providing right kind of resources. All right. So in a recent past, about 4 years back, 2015 to be precise, Rashtra Bank came up with a merger requirement whereby they require the banks and financial institutions to enhance the capital by at least fourfold. So that brought in a massive change in the financial system of the country. Okay, what are the important enforcements that Nepal Rashtra Bank has been, executing in the amongst the banks and financial institutions, and then regularly following up on this? Okay, these are minimum requirements. Okay, Rashtra Bank is always making sure that all the banks and financial institutions they meet these requirements. That is, need to maintain a capital adequacy ratio of 10%. I told you before that it has to be minimum 10%. If it falls below 10%, then banks are prohibited from lending anymore, right? They have to make sure that it's 10%, all right? Or if it's below 11%, in fact, then banks will not be allowed to distribute dividends. The CCD ratio has to be maximum 80%. That is credit against capital and deposit ratio. Okay, so the outstanding loan amount must not exceed 80% of your capital and deposit put together, right? So if you exceed this 80% figure, then Rashtra Bank will penalize you. So it has to come below 80%. Now, most of the banks and financial institutions, they try to stay as close to 80% as possible, because if they stay way below 80% at 70, 72, 74%, then they lose a lot of money, because they are losing potential interest earning opportunities by not investing, by holding such big margin. So it has to be as close to 80% as possible. The CRR ratio, that's a cash reserve rate ratio, which once was at high 6% and then 5% for many years, and has now been brought down slowly. It's down to 3% due to coronavirus factor. Because of coronavirus factor, because banks required, in CRR, cash reserve ratio, this is the amount of money that has to be deposited in Nepal Rashtra Bank in a interest-free account. Okay, that's cash reserve ratio. Okay, so when it was 6%, then 5%, the banks were not getting interest on 5% of the total deposit, and they were not allowed to, invest that much amount of money. So they had to hold that money in interest-free account in Nepal Rashtra Bank. Now, because of coronavirus factor, so Nepal Rashtra Bank has brought it down to 3% as of now, and which means that banks, they have now, the whole banks put together, they have like, I think, almost 60 billion rupees money now, fund available for lending out to business companies and those seeking loan. Then Rashtra Bank has also been working on a base rate concept. Base rate is a rate which is a rate below which banks are not allowed to lend. Okay, so and this base rate is calculated with a series of variables, and this is actually basically the cost of fund of a bank, and on that you add 3% or 4% to take care of all your overhead expenses and your desired volume of profit. So that way you come up with a base rate. And then we have the interbank rates. That's the rate that's applied when you lend to other banks or when you borrow from other banks. So you have this interbank interest rate. We have the prime lending rates, prime, which is again set in Nepal Rashtra Bank. When you need to borrow a fund from Nepal Rashtra Bank, they have their own lending rates. Then we have this loan loss provisioning requirement, which is one of the toughest things which banks face during every audit, during every inspection of a Nepal Rashtra Bank, where they are given parameters. So here you need to be extremely faithful, and of course, good governance comes into play here, where you have to make sure where you have to make provisions on potential, difficult and loans which might go bad. So here, depending on how long the installment or interest or loan has not been paid, by how long the loan or interest has remained overdue, then you have to start deducting a certain amount from your profit and then putting in loan loss provisioning account. And that way your profit could decrease, but you are basically strengthening your bank's position, right? So that is loan loss provisioning, and this loan loss provisioning would be like 25% if your loan is overdue by 3 months, is 50% if your loan is overdue by 6 months, and then you have to make up 100% provisioning if your loan is overdue by a year. So which means a party has taken borrowed 10 crores from you, and the party doesn't pay for one whole year, is overdue, means you have to deduct 10 crore rupees from your profit and put it in loan loss provision account, meaning for that particular period your profit comes down by 10 crores. So imagine if you have 15, 20, 30 such clients who are defaulting and are not paying, and whose loan status is overdue by 3 months or 6 months or a year. So which means you have massive loan loss provisions to be made during every accounting period, and your profit will keep on standing low all the time. And then we also have Nepal Rastra Bank issue directives regarding currency transactions and the way banks conduct their import-export business. All right. Okay, guys. Now I don't want to spend too much time on this capital position of all the banks from 2017, 18, 19. That you can get in any figure, any other thing. Now, who are the other players in the economy? Okay, besides the banks and financial institutions, as I explained to you earlier, there are several other players whose roles are growing each day, like the institutions like capital marketplace, the insurance companies, the savings and credit cooperatives, venture capital companies, etc. Very prominent, almost all the economies of the world have now started building strong roots in the financial system of Nepal as well, these venture capital companies, right? And then there are also state-owned institutions like Employee Provident Funds, Karmachari Sanchay Kosh, and then Citizen Investment Fund, that's Lagani, Nagrik Lagani Kosh. They are significant players in the financial market as they hold a very large fund and hence play big roles in the liquidity supply. So they are one of the largest liquidity supplies in the market because they hold like hundreds of billions of rupees of fund with them. So they are one of the largest sources of liquidity supply for the banking system. And same is the case of insurance companies. You also hold like billions of rupees of funds. Like every insurance company, life insurance companies, there are companies which hold like 12 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion rupees of funds. So when you talk about all those insurance companies, so they have several hundred billions of rupees of funds in those companies. So they are very big, powerful, players in the liquidity supply market in our country. Now, again, now all these companies, the insurance companies, the employees provident fund, citizen investment fund, they have now started moving directly into project funding activities. So which they are doing either as equity or as loan. So which means so they are now very prominent players, and they are kind of like a direct challenge to the banks as well. Right. So these then let's come down to almost one of our last slides here. The venture capital and private equity companies are prominently functioning in many developed economies and now just introduced in Nepalese market. So these institutions will be engaged in both large and medium to small scale projects, both as a catalyst in channelizing the resources in large projects and also as source for private equity for medium to small size startup projects. Okay, so in a country like Nepal, where almost all banks and financial institutions demand fixed assets as collateral as for security and equity participation of 30 to 40% in every project. So in such cases, these private equity companies like venture capital companies or private equity companies are expected to help young, enterprising, aspiring business realize their dreams, because these private equity companies give startup companies, entrepreneurs, they require fund to start up their projects. These funds will come in form of equity, so that will help you leverage this equity and get more bank loan if you require, or this equity on their own might be adequate to go ahead with your project. And for that, You don't need to give any collateral security to these private equity companies at all. Now, this is second last slide, coronavirus effect. The ongoing pandemic is, of course, set to change the entire future of the world for a long time. And Nepal's figures, which we saw earlier, exhibited for years 2020 and 2021, will not be achieved now, and that rest be assured. And the entire world's GDP is set to change as a productivity will be down, including agriculture. Uh, so that's going to be a very, I think, a big negative setback for all of us. And inflation will be high, and definitely, and many business firms and self-employed people will go bankrupt, and many businesses will need to wait for a long time to rebuild the business and market chain. And of course, the liquidity supply will be tighter because everybody will be in need of funds, and then commodity markets will definitely decline, and capital market will suffer as well. So this is probably one of the gravest moments in history, and we need to fight it sensibly with determination, courage, and collaboration. Okay. Now coming to the last slide of my presentation, my topic today. What I'm telling here is 55% of world population will have no or minimal social protection after this coronavirus is over. Uh, Big countries may recover after some time, but for developing countries, the income losses will be to a tune of more than $220 billion. And if this coronavirus thing gets prolonged beyond, let's say, April or May, then this figure would go up much more, right? And Nepal will suffer reduced activities in remittance, foreign aid, since uh, they will reduce activity in remittance, foreign aid, then of course tourism sector. Tourism sector will not bounce back for a long, long time now. People will not be flying. They will not be spending money. So for that, the hotels are going to suffer very badly. Hotels, the resorts, and the airlines will all suffer, and mostly the hotels will suffer very badly. And then remittance, of course, will suffer because the employing foreign labor destination countries, their own activities are already down, could come down further, like countries in the Middle East, in Malaysia, or other countries where there are large chunks of Nepalese working. So the remittance will come down. Foreign aid will definitely come down because the countries which are giving Nepal foreign aid, they themselves are so badly hit by this coronavirus that they will not be in position to give us, aid for quite some time. And then, of course, in our internal domestic environment, the agriculture is going to be really bad because we have already missed this month's paddy plantation season is over. We have not been able to harvest the wheat, and we are not being able to sow the seedlings required for Ashar rice plantation. So that season is slowly going. So which means we'll be missing plantation seasons of for rice and plantation a lot of other crops. And then our poultry industry is very badly hit, and it may take many months after coronavirus is over for the poultry industry also to bounce back. So that way there will be reduced activities, and as such, Nepal's government will have to come up with very long-term flexible plans that can be strictly implemented. Guys, we need to tighten up our belts now, and hope for the best that everything will be okay. All right, so guys, I'm sorry I've had to rush you through these sessions. Uh, I hope my whatever I try to deliver to you guys managed to uh, you know get hold of what I was trying to convey. And if you have any questions to ask me, Probably, I don't know whether you can interact with me on this screen. You could go ahead, or you could send me questions in future. You don't need to do it right now. You can always send me questions. I'm always open. You can send questions to my email, and KFA can provide you my email address. All right, guys. Anything you need to say, you can say it now. Anything? Okay, I think I have a small communication from Sanju. Uh, okay, Bivish Thapa Magar. You said a question asking how much time will it take for Nepal to grow as China compared to the China and India under this crisis? Okay, uh, that's a very valid question you have raised here, Bivesh. You see, I think unless and until this coronavirus thing is tackled, it's going to be very difficult for uh, governments, especially a government like ours, which has to work with very limited resources, to really come up with a very ambitious plan. Of course, our government must think of plans on long-term basis, and even now to start planning. Okay, if the coronavirus effect lasts till end of April, how do we move forward? If it goes till end of May, how do we go forward? End of June, how do we go more? How do we move forward? So government has to come up with these planning. Okay, so this is how we need to take our various sectors forward. Okay, this is how we are going to come up with relief packages for business companies not to go bankrupt, because that's probably the most important thing that government has to do, coming up with the relief packages to rescue the business companies, business firms. There are so many thousands of small scale, medium scale business enterprises which will not be able to, survive at all. Even now, even if the coronavirus thing is over in next 2 weeks, but these companies will not bounce back for a long, long time, and then these companies could go bankrupt. And the same thing could apply to self-employed people who are running their own small companies, consultancy firms, their own small, companies with capital of small 10, 15, 20 lakh, 30 lakh rupees. They will not be able to survive. And even if this thing prolongs, then even large scale industries will not be able to survive unless they are given special relief packages like tax rebates, discounted tax holidays, interest rebate, discounted interest rate, some kind of deferred interest rate for some time, a capitation of interest rate and bank interest rate, and then of course other you know lot of other relief whatever measures. So this is the only way Nepal will be able to come out of this present situation. And I would say that it will probably take, if this thing coronavirus thing ends in next 2 weeks, let's say, assuming that's a very optimistic outlook, then it will take at least 6 months for even small scale businesses to come out with this situation. And for large scale service sector industry like airlines, or let's say hotels and resorts, for them it's going to take minimum 1 year. Even if this thing ends in next 2 weeks, if this thing goes on for one more month or 2 more months, then for service sector industry, for them to come out of the situation, it will take close to 2 years or maybe even longer. Right. So that's what I can say confidently. Okay, is there any other question? Okay, I think we have come to the end of the session. So thank you guys for being out there listening to me. So if you guys have any other further questions, please you can send the questions to me through email. Get my email from KFA. Thank you so much. Stay home, stay safe. That's the only way you can help our government control the spread of coronavirus. All right. Okay. Bye bye. Hopefully see you again. Bye.